Welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, where today's brightest minds in the medical device industry go to get their most useful and actionable insider knowledge direct from some of the world's leading medical device experts and companies.
On this episode of the Global Medical Device Podcast, I had an opportunity to speak with Annie Campbell and Emily Holden. Annie and Emily are with a company called Now Medical Studio, and they're involved with another project called SciArt Now, SciArtNow. What I found really intriguing about Annie and Emily's work is they're focused on medical illustration and how this artwork really can be incorporated into help telling a story of a medical device company or a procedure. And it's really fascinating to kind of hear them and then how they approach their work. So I hope you enjoy this episode of the Global Medical Device Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast. This is your host and founder at Greenlight Guru, Jon Speer. And today I'm looking forward to this conversation. These ladies, Annie and Emily, are just a real pleasure to talk to. And they have this awesome podcast. And well, let me introduce the two of them first. So Annie Campbell and Emily Holden are directors of Now Medical Studio, a company that specializes in creating medical illustrations and animations for companies in the pharmaceutical, medical device, and healthcare industry. They enjoy making the inner body look beautiful. Sounds weird, but really cool. Showing the normally unseen and telling a story as part of the work. Their passion for medical illustration has grown into a side project. Together, they also run an educational platform called SciArt Now, and you can check that out at sciartnow.com, SciArtNow.com. where they provide tutorials, advice, and resources for anyone looking to learn more about the medical illustration industry. I'll also say if you go to the SciArt Now website, you'll also see their podcast, link to the podcast, and it's just really good stuff. So Annie, Emily, welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And the last time you and I spoke, I learned that you're in beautiful Scotland, which is a place that's on my bucket list. So I'm looking forward to hopefully meeting in person one day in the not too distant future. But I guess to dive in a little bit, tell the audience a little bit about what your business does.
Yeah, sure. So we are basically artists with science backgrounds, so we're medical illustrators and animators. So basically what we do is we provide content to help teach people about something that happens in your body. So if something goes wrong, say like a heart attack, we draw all of the illustrations and animations that creates visuals for that. So we help companies explain the science of things. So if they have a new device that's coming out or they have a new drug, people need to know how it works. And we're here to help create the visuals that train people on how to use those devices or what happens in your body when the drugs enters.
And it's interesting to me because science and art, I mean, you're tapping into both sides of your brain.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how did you get into this field?
So there's kind of two ways of coming into it. You can come into it from more of a art backgrounds, but also a lot of people working in this industry come from a science background as well. So both Annie and I have, and actually our whole team, we all hold master's degrees in medical art. I had my undergraduate degree was in more fine art painting, and I kind of stumbled upon medical illustration and just fell in love with, I guess, as you said, the combination of art and science. And there's a great long history of that as well, with the kind of emergency of learning about the body and anatomy and stuff. And that was where my passion for it kind of began, and it kind of fed into my fine art work. And then from there, I discovered the master's course that I went to. I went to the medical art course in Dundee, and Annie came from a more of a science background, so I'll let you chat about the science side.
I did neuroscience as my undergrad major, and I realized that I would not be a very good researcher when it came to graduate, but also I just had this side passion of just art and design. And I would always be drawing my dissertation rather than writing it. So when I discovered that there was such a career that combined these two worlds, there was a need for people who could know the science jargon, but also have an understanding of art and design, and just merge quite beautifully. And so I ended up going over to the United States to study medical illustration, because I just thought, what a great experience it would be to learn more about the industry over there as well. So I studied at the biomedical visualization program at Chicago at UIC, and it was great. We learned a lot about just, traditional techniques, digital techniques, VR, AR, animation, and then moved back to Scotland, and that's where Emily and I met. We met at the University of Dundee dental school and medical school, where we both in-house medical illustrators there. And then from there, a relationship kind of grew, and then we just combined forces and just formed a company to where we can do this day in and day out.
Well, I have to say it's a little inspiring for me personally. Growing up, I think I was an okay artist, pretty good artist. Yeah, I love drawing and sketching and that sort of thing. And then somewhere along the way, I went to engineering school, and my theory is that the engineering studies sucked out the creativeness.
No.
I don't know. It could be. I don't know. There's been a lot of days I'm like, I should go get a sketch pad and start drawing again. But it's a little terrifying, to be honest. I'm like, I don't know. I'm afraid I'll just wad up everything that I sketch and throw it away. But anyway, I am a little inspired. And Emily, your point. I mean, when you were speaking a moment ago, I just imagine some of the vintage illustrations of the human body, and just seeing all of that. I can imagine that would be a great inspiration. But your work is fascinating. I mean, it's more than just. I mean, it's in some respects to me, it's like I could see having some of your art hanging on the wall. But you also incorporate animation and that sort of thing. But tell us more about your team as well at Now Medical Studio.
Yeah, so we have a team of really talented artists. For me, I think they're really talented unicorns, because they have so many different skills that they just apply to. And then they know a little bit about animation, they know a little bit about design, they know how to digitally draw, but their specialty is medical content. So it's just these unicorn skills combined all into one. So I'm in awe with them. They are much more talented than both of us. I mean, that's why we have them on the team.
That's the gig, right? Surround yourself with people that are smarter and more talented than you are. I mean, it's sort of the secret to being a founder and an entrepreneur at times.
Exactly. So our job is just trying to put them on this pedestal and just say, oh, you're doing amazing. Don't worry about imposter syndrome or anything like that. Just keep doing what you're doing. But they're really great. They have a mixture of science backgrounds, or they come from an art background, like myself and Emily, but they all just go to a master's program to learn about medical illustration. But I do want to preface that not everyone who enters this field does go through this kind of traditional route of schooling. We've worked with a lot of doctors turned medical illustrators, or research scientists turned medical illustrators. So it's, there's always a different path if anyone's interested in entering this field.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of some other studios, a lot of some other kind of medical illustration studios who are maybe doing 3D work, they might have two completely separate teams. So they may hire people who are more 3D generalists, so they're not specialized in the science field, but they're really, really good at the 3D work. Mm-hmm. And then they'll also have another side of their team who are just all the science experts, and they will write all the content, give very tight direction of what should happen, and then the animators will kind of take it from there. So we kind of do a combination of both on our team. We need to be able to go through the briefs from our clients, kind of look deep into the science, do our own research, and then we kind of do the lot in-house ourselves.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because we're such a small team, we kind of need to do that part. We don't have
Right.
different departments.
Right.
Oh, how nice would that be?
Wow. Yeah.
Hop into the science department.
Well, I mean, but there's a good bad to that too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's something, at least for me, that's really awesome about, having a small, intimate team, but there's also something that's great when your team grows and your business grows too. So, it's just different stages, but, keep in mind that and no pressure. I'm sorry, I don't mean this to come off as putting you under the spotlight necessarily, but the Global Medical Device Podcast is the number one podcast in the medical device industry. So there's a good chance that some of the folks who are listening might be able to utilize your services. So I guess paint a picture for us, since you're both artists. What types of companies or projects or engagements do you seek, and how can listeners what should they be thinking of to consider somebody like Now Medical Studio to help them?
So we have various different companies, and surprisingly, they're actually all based outside of the UK. We have one or two in the UK, but most of them are in the States or elsewhere around about Europe. We work with a lot of startups, so their challenges usually when they're kind of entering the field and looking for funding is presenting themselves and their science in a really easy to understand but also appealing way to investors or other scientists, especially go to congresses or they're presenting webinars. So this is where we come in to help these startups. It's just, okay, what's your brand? How do you want to present yourself? Do you have a logo? Right? Let's try and create graphics that align with that. So it's basically like, if you're going to an interview, you want to put on your best suit, right? So it's kind of like putting on your best suit in terms of all the visuals that you have behind you. And then when it comes to telling the science story, we always kind of break it down into the most simplest of terms, because obviously everyone who's working with the science part, they're the content experts. They know it inside and out. But when you're presenting it to like investors, for example, it's just the most easiest way to get the information across. And we say, like, if a 10-year-old can understand, or if your granny can understand it, then that's a great, easy, understandable visual or story that you're trying to tell. So we work with these startups to try and figure that science story out and figure out how to explain the science to them. And then through that, this can be in many forms. So it can be like brochures, websites, marketing collaterals, everything that goes on your Twitter. We try and make sure that something that can live in one space can be reused multiple ways. So that's quite a nice return of their investment. And other companies that we work with, Emily, I'm going to let you talk about, because I think I talked a lot about the startup teams. We also work with other companies as well.
Yeah, so in terms of other kind of clients that we work with, they can be people who are actively involved in research. So we have a lot of clients who are like surgeons, and then they're looking to explain a new technique that they've come up with that could be using certain like medical devices in a different way, or like things like aortic grafts or things like that. It's helping them explain something that people can't go into a textbook or do a Google search. It's like they're innovating new techniques, and they're needing a company like ourselves to visualize this as well. And then other things are things like universities as well, things to support their curriculum. And let me think.
Mm-hmm. And then we also, on the other hand, we work with like medical communications agencies for like just press releases. So last year, there was a lot of press releases related around drugs or COVID, or just, educating the general public about things. So they would hire studios like us to help them with the graphics while they work on the copy and everything like that. So we have a close relationship with agencies like that as well. And then there's the odd kind of, just like sports brands or anything that really want to get technical with the anatomy to show what their athletes are wearing. So sometimes we do fun projects like that, but those are few and far between.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as you were sharing some of the types of engagements that you get involved with, I mean, Annie, I like the startup angle. I mean, I'm a big fan or advocate of reminding startups that it's important for them to tell their story, whether it be to an investor as they're looking to raise funds or whatever the case may be. They have to tell their story. And a lot of times devices, they can be simple or complicated, but just being able to see a picture or an animation that explains how their technology works. I was also thinking too, as Emily, you were sharing some of the other types of engagements that. I just remember early days of my career in the med device space. We were working on a project. The company was working on a project for aortic aneurysm, and at that time it was somewhat revolutionary because it was primarily it was going to deliver a aortic vascular stent intravenously or intravascularly. I mean, the previous methodology involved essentially cutting down, to the femoral artery, or a lot more open type procedure, and they were trying to revolutionize the method of delivery. But it's super complicated to be able to understand, where to insert the introducer and how to navigate it to the aorta, and then deploy the stent graft and all these sorts of things. So I can see where some sort of illustration and animation would be huge to help tell that story, but also to help educate potential users. And one other point, and I'd love to get your reaction. Every medical device company probably is going to interact with a regulatory agency at some point in time. And I know there's, if you do a regulatory submission, you're including labeling and all that sort of thing, usually instructions for use. But I have to imagine something that can highlight the more of the mode of action and tell the story through visual. I got to believe that would be a nice complement to any sort of regulatory submission as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so IFUs are also one that we're currently doing a lot of them right now, and they're also important. I think one thing that's useful as part of, like, if you're working with any medical illustration studio, not just ours, is that we all know that, okay, things got to go through a med legal review, and we understand that you have regulatory reviews and stuff like that. So it's our job to prepare our research that contributes to any image or any kind of IFUs or anything like that for your reviews. I don't know if that helps, or if anyone's ever had experience working with just a general agency, maybe they might not be aware of the amount of evidence that you need to present in these reviews. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like what makes us a little bit more specialized in terms of medical content.
Yeah, I mean, that's in my opinion, or my experience rather, an IFU is a lot of times something that we construct to describe how to use a product, the way it's supposed to, the steps and so on. But usually it is predominantly text, and sometimes there might be a graphic here and there that's incorporated within the instructions. But my experience is that never gets read. It usually gets tossed in the garbage.
I'm sure it works like this.
Yeah.
But I mean, think about it. I mean, we generally put those instructions for use. Sometimes it's affixed to the packaging, and once you open the product and take the contents out, that packaging usually gets tossed away, and it's like, there's got to be a better way. So I'm curious to see, or I'm optimistic and hopeful that your work with Now Medical Studio can sort of elevate and escalate the IFU to the next level so that it's actually used.
Yeah, I think that's Annie kind of brushed on this briefly earlier. It's the kind of thing, like, if you decide that you're wanting to create more of an IFU, but you're doing it in the form of, say, like a 3D medical animation, you can actually, what we can do is work out a way that there's lots of reusability, because we're already building, say, like the 3D models for the animation. This can also be used as part of a website, as an interactive content on website, or if you're creating an animation, it can be kind of structured, and clips can be reused if you're wanting to also create a resource for patients. If you're maybe working closely with patients, there can kind of be, I guess, two versions of something, one for information on how something's used for surgeons, and then there can be another thing of explaining to a patient how it's inserted in the body. And the way you present that could actually be very similar. All the actual visuals might be the same. It's just a case of packaging it slightly differently, putting different text, different voiceover, all these other aspects that can actually mean that from, I guess, one bigger investment into the actual 3D work itself, it can then be transferred into different things. And then these 3D models can also be used as stills on website or in brochures, things like that. It's kind of I guess that's one thing that we really like to focus on, is like, how, if we do this, how can we get the most out of it for the clients, I guess.
Yeah, and especially with like how things are being used, like images say 1,000 words. So if your device is really simple to use, it's like step 1, step 2, step 3, have 3 images that show that, and it's more likely that the surgeon might be more willing to think about using your product over, maybe a competitor product or something like that, rather than writing in a text like, this knobbin does this, where you twist it around 90 degrees, just like stick it in an image. It's a lot easier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I had an old boss and mentor used to say that, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a prototype is worth 1,000 pictures. And that saying has kind of stuck with me for many, many years now. But as I have learned more about what you're doing with Now Medical Studio, I'm like, okay, well, it's not a prototype per se, but it can be more than just a picture. So it's having an illustration and an animation to describe my product. I mean, in essence, it could be a form of a prototype if I'm very early on trying to explain what my product does. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it could be that stepping stone towards obtaining funding to make prototypes, right? So you kind of need like a proof of concept, I suppose. So if you have like sketches or diagrams, just going back to vascular surgeons, just because we've been talking about them quite a lot, is they're so talented. They will actually take a device that's meant for a thoracic aneurysm, turn it around and stick it in the abdomen. It's just, it's like connecting pipes. As long as it works and it heals the patient, like they will try and make and be innovative in that way to make things work. And through that, some surgeons have been so innovative that they've created new grafts, and they now have grafts that are named after them, which is so cool. But it's because, they try to, they'll draw it and stuff like that, but unless they can have something to use, it's a lot more effective. And then, so I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, and I think even to illustrate that a little bit further, to use a slight pun, vascular surgeons, not only are they being innovative with products and finding new applications, they're doing this intravascularly. So with very little, they can't always see exactly what they're doing and where they're going, as if they're looking at it in person. And sometimes they'll have a CT or some image, but it's not like they're looking at the vasculature 3 inches in front of them. I mean, they're kind of using their hands, and they're so skilled. I mean, like I've been blessed to work with some really, really talented physicians over the years. And I don't know if the two of you know about a guide wire or what that is, but like we used to make these guide wires, and it's basically a way to sort of, for the physician to navigate vasculature. And sometimes it could be very tortuous and lots of twists and turns, and how they can like just do slight twists of that guide wire to get to where they're going is just amazing to me.
Yeah, it's basically like blind surgery, and through feel is incredible. I think they're rock stars, really.
Yeah, underappreciated for sure. So I guess share with the folks a little bit more about your process, get into some of the technical side, and maybe explain or share, when would be an ideal time to engage your services and that sort of thing.
Sure. So Let's talk about just like an illustration, for example. So usually there's like an intro call where we find more about what your needs are, find out more about your technology or your science, and just get to know what your hopes and dreams, basically, what next steps are. And then say if we're creating like a nice branded illustration or a diagram is, I would say, probably a 2-month turnaround, because we have a 3-stage review process. So we first start off with like really rough concept sketches, making sure we've done a lot of the pre-production work, and that includes looking at research papers, all of the materials that you send to us, doing some anatomy research on our end if necessary, or science research, trying to source proteins or anything like that from Protein Data Bank. I'll leave Emily to talk about the more technical side of how we use those things. Trying to get like MRIs, and then we'll put all that together into the first sketch of the illustration. And I think this is where the collaboration is really, really important. So it's basically us and the client. We're a team here, and we look to them to provide their feedback, their guidance. Hey, does this work for their audience? Because they know their audience much, much better than what we can do. And they know the science really well. And then so we'll go back in round 2, refine that a little bit more, start to implement more design elements in there, think about their branding, their colors, and just kind of like polish it up. And then they look at it again. So at this stage, it's probably a really great point to have like a mid-league review if necessary, bring in all the key players and stuff like that, and we prepare for that. And then we have a final round where we polish everything off, and we've all basically brought it to a point where we're all really happy, and then we just deliver and then start to kind of disseminate it into all the different collateral materials that you want. So when he's going to brochure, we'll put in their brochure. If he's going to website, we'll prepare the files that they can upload to the website or social media, etc. So it's a nice 3-stage process. It just means that our clients have that opportunity to provide feedback, because I think if you're not very familiar with working with a design firm, you might just think like, oh, I'll give you a brief and you just go away and you come back with a beautiful image. Is that how it works? And it's just like, no, it's okay. We want your valued feedback. Like what you have to say is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in terms of, it's pretty similar for like animation wise as well. It's that kind of breaks down to like a three or four kind of like rounds of review again. So we kind of start off, I guess, either we're provided with a script from the client, which is, I guess, the easiest thing, because then they've had time to sit down and think about like how the story's reading. We can review that and give, I guess, feedback and kind of guide like, oh, maybe the story could change slightly to make it a little bit more accessible or things like that. And then it would go into a storyboarding phase, and then go through into kind of more like an animatic. So it could be like the voiceover and the images would all line up, so you kind of get the flow of like how long the animation is going to be, what each scene is, what's on screen, if there's any text on screen, what the voiceover is saying, and then it goes to a slightly more final round of animation, so you can see everything in motion. It's not completely highly refined and polished, but it gives you a sense of exactly how everything's moving, and then any changes at that point can still be made. And then the final review is when we do the final rounds, we do the big glossy final render and post-production and everything that kind of outputs the final work, I guess. So we'd like to break everything down,
right,
so we can get as much reviews as possible, because I guess if it did happen, especially with animation, if a company were just to give the script and go, oh, go make this, and then after a lot of time has passed, because it's a much longer production for animation, they come back and they don't like it, and there's not really much you can do at the end, because the hours of investment and the investment in rendering and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Changes are costly. Very costly.
Yeah.
And I know you try to balance the science side and the art side, and you have scientific backgrounds in addition to your art backgrounds. But I have to imagine that that's still a huge challenge to be able to get that just right from a scientific accuracy perspective. Can you maybe share some thoughts about, how you manage that and how you balance the science and the art?
Yeah. So here's the thing. So sometimes people ask us is like, why do medical illustrations? We've got photography there. Why don't you just take a nice pretty picture? And then so like, if you're trying to teach someone something about what's going on in your body in a surgery, the picture is going to be red because it's all going to be real bloody and all the tubes are going to be pretty much the same color, your arteries, veins, nerves, and everything like that. So that's where the design part comes in. So we have the ability to kind of make organs look a little bit more plumper, not like gravity's pulling them down so they look like organs. We have the ability to make things transparent to show what's happening inside. So we talked a little bit about blind surgery, when the surgeons were just feeding guide wires and they don't really know, they can't see where it's going. So it's our job to visualize that for them. So when they're learning about the surgery, they know that if they make this turn, this is what the image should look like in their mind. So we're kind of helping them visualize that for them in their head. So when they're in the surgery room, they've got maybe some images that other medical illustrators have created in there. And like, okay, if I do this, this is going to go this way because, it kind of looks like that. In one of the resources I was looking at. And then about scientific accuracy, there is a spectrum. So how accurate does the protein need to look? What's your audience? If it's a general public audience, they probably don't need to see something that's like highly anatomic, like with the atoms and the ball and stick structures, because that might be visual overload for them. They might get scared off a little bit too much like that. So that's why sometimes when you see like medical animations by pharma companies, the drugs and everything and the proteins are these simple shapes, because that's enough to tell a story. This shape connects to this shape and it causes this chain reaction. And this is where our drug is coming in, So it's definitely who's our audience, and that determines how close to the real thing it needs to look. Also, if you think about like molecules and stuff like that, you've got SEM photography, but usually they're like black and white. So there is a little bit artistic licensing as to what these colors are, which is where like branding and stuff, you can really play about with that as well. But I think, Emily, do we use like data sets as well, right? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so in terms of the the technicalities of making things accurate, we use a lot of data visualization software to ensure that what we're creating is accurate. So we'll continue with the vascular surgery route since we're there. So we would take data like CT data or MRI data and use data visualization software like 3D Slicer or Invisalis, things like that. And what this does is it takes each individual slice of data and generates a 3D model. It's kind of what you would see when people are diagnosing stuff, if they're planning for surgeries and stuff. But what we can do with this data is we can export this as a STL or OBJ 3D file, and then we'll use this real life data as our base for modeling our 3D models as well, or just for doing illustrations as well. So as an example, we recently did an illustration for dental surgeons, and it was looking at very specific planes of the head and neck. So these weren't just like plain old like sagittal or like transverse planes. This was like halfway through the cheek, or a really strange like oblique cut. So for us, if we didn't have the resources or knowledge, I guess, how to use this kind of visualization software so that we could actually use real life data to slice it, work out like, oh, this is how that looks. If it's cut in half that way, what would the muscles then look like? And then that's when we start problem solving using our anatomy training from our courses and stuff to kind of, I guess, piece it all together. Other things that we use, we've mentioned the use of proteins a lot. So the protein data bank is a very large resource out there, and there are tools out there that you can kind of take the code off the protein and put it into the software, and it will visualize it in a 3D form in a couple of different ways. So like in the kind of ball and stick form, or in like a space fill kind of like blobby model. So these are, from this, we know that this is like an accurate shape for what that protein should look like. We can download that data. We can then we topologize it in 3D software, or we can kind of build out a more kind of like stylized form, but based on real data, I guess. So that's some of the more kind of technical.
No, it's super. I mean, it's way more, and I'll confess, it's way more technical than I imagined before we started talking today. So I appreciate you going into some technical details.
It's okay.
And the thing that I really appreciate the most about the two of you, and granted, we've only talked a few times, but you're really passionate about medical illustration, so much so that you seem to have this attitude of giving back to the community and trying to help educate and inform folks. So talk a little bit about some of your, I guess, side projects or other initiatives with respect to how you're giving back to the community.
Yeah, so Emily and I started this side project educational platform called SciArt Now, because we were finding that there were so many people that were interested in entering the field or switching careers to become medical illustrators or animators, but it's just they just didn't know where to go. So we created like a one-stop website that basically signposted them to all of the professional organizations in our field, or all of the schools that offer it, because sometimes maybe the organizations don't list the schools because they might be quite new and haven't, and things like that. And we were hoping that would kind of cover a lot of the repeat questions that these lovely people would just email us with, which we were actually quite surprised. Like, I don't know. That's quite nice. Why are they emailing us? But we must be doing something right that has resonated with them, that they want to enter this path.
Sure.
I think it's, sorry.
I was going to say, and people can find out more about SciArt Now, again, by going to SciArtNow.com. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, yeah, it was just a case of, it was just a lot of repeat questions, and like we felt that the amount of, like, sometimes we were putting in a lot of effort into replying to people and kind of like saying the same things over and over again. And I think it's just a case of, we are really passionate about the field, and I think a lot of the concerns are like, oh, how can I do this? I really like it. Like, what are my options? I don't understand. Or, oh, I've just started my degree in science. Oh, have I made the wrong choice? Should I have done like illustration? Or and just like, it's just trying to like find that place that if people like Google, like, oh, I want to be a medical illustrator, they're greeted with a lovely website, or like a social, one of the social media platforms that they go, oh, actually, there's loads of people here who are really interested in this niche thing. I think for me, I think sometimes when you kind of explain, oh, I'm a medical illustrator to someone, they're like, it's very, it's like, or just why would you want to do that? And
so you draw body parts, okay, right? Oh,
nice. So it's that kind of like, you kind of find like, oh, there are lots of other people who like doing this as well. I'm not just very strange.
Yeah.
So I think it's just having that kind of hub for people to come together.
And then both Emily and I, we have our own YouTube channels where we wanted to create tutorials about medical illustration. And actually, it's which has led to Emily being invited to have her own LinkedIn course, a medical animation LinkedIn course. Which
oh, wow. That's
you
really
can find
cool.
that out. So it was really great, and it was really helpful. And I think it's helped a lot of people just kind of, even if they don't want to go the traditional route, they can at least like take Emily's course, for example, and then just kind of side hustle their way there, because maybe they're scientists that know the science. They just need a little bit of self-taught, art training or something like that. And then so we found that as we're growing a team, we're creating all of these tutorials in-house. And we thought, what's the point on keeping them to ourselves? Why not just share it with everyone? And if it helps someone out there, then that's great. It's helped someone. And that's our main goal. And then so far, the feedback has been really positive. We've had people that are really, like, they want to also contribute as well. And I think together it's just helping grow our medical illustration community and industry, just getting more people to be aware about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think for people who are just kind of starting out in the field, there's definitely, there wasn't really any resources. I think that's what spurred me on to start doing tutorials to begin with. It was just I was wanting to create a medical animation. I was like, I don't know how. You go on YouTube, click in for tutorials, there's nothing there. So I think it's just trying to like fill that gap of like there's a lot of general principles to animation and stuff that you can kind of maybe work out how to do something, but it's kind of like just filling in that kind of barrier. Like, no, you can do this technique, but if you do it this way, you can make it into like beautiful flowing red blood cells or something like that. It's
yeah. And through that, our podcast grew because we were also finding like, okay, maybe this kind of nugget of information isn't suited for a tutorial or an article. Well, what if we said it, and mostly it's about like finding jobs, because sometimes companies might not realize that they need a medical illustrator, but they'll usually be listed like a designer is needed or an animator is needed for a healthcare company or a design company. Like, how amazing would it be if they actually got connected with a medical illustrator that has those both worlds? So, their content experts don't need to give a basic biology lesson to an artist each time they want a project to be done, because they're being connected with the right people and stuff like that. So that's where we thought, okay, let's do a podcast where we can help younger artists find these roles, enter these roles, and then just kind of grow their own positions within these companies.
Ladies, this has been fascinating for me, and I'm sure the listeners of the Global Medical Device Podcast will agree. Obviously, I mentioned the SciArt Now website, and we'll provide a link to that. I did find while you were mentioning it, I had no idea until you mentioned it, that you have a YouTube channel, and I found that, so I'll provide a link to that. You mentioned Emily's tutorial on LinkedIn. If you could shoot me the link to how people can learn more about that, we'll make sure that is included with the text that accompanies this podcast as well. So, we're at a point where we're going to wrap things up on this episode. Any final thoughts before we do so?
Oh,
I know now. It's like, oh my goodness. Oh, no, and if not, that's fine too. We could call it a wrap. So
it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for having us on the podcast. We are in awe of what you've managed to do with everything that you've put out.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you saying so. And folks, learn more about Now Medical Studio and SciArt Now. Again, I'm going to include all that information where you can get a hold of Emily, Holden, and Annie Campbell. And of course, if you need some support for your medical device initiatives, that's what we're here for as well at Greenlight Guru. Greenlight Guru is the only medical device quality management system software platform in the industry today. It's been designed specifically and exclusively for medical device companies by actual medical device professionals. Who would have thought that such a thing was important? But it is. It aligns with FDA and EU MDR and all the regulations and standards that are applicable for those of us navigating our medical device journey. So go to www.greenlight.guru to learn more. We just launched our new Halo for Change Management. What is that? Well, it incorporates artificial intelligence and machine learning into your quality management system so that your processes can be more robust and thorough and help you better navigate change management in a more effective and efficient way. So be sure to check that out too. Again, go to www.greenlight.guru to learn more. As always, thank you so much for being loyal listeners of the Global Medical Device Podcast, the #1 podcast in the medical device industry. Continue to share with your friends and colleagues. And until next time, this is your host and founder, Jon Speer, and you have been listening to the Global Medical Device Podcast.